The purpose of this movie is to explore features of the period I discovered through my research and analysis of William Shakespeare's plays. Gender roles changed in response to the early modern period in England. As you will see from the images and the videos selected, women began to test their roles in society and were able to gain social power as a result. The themes associated with gender roles of the period are most important to understanding early modern England because the changes reflect those of Protestant Reformation. Throughout the video you will hear music typical of the period. The first piece is John Dolan's Royal Wind Music. The music features 10 different sized wind instruments resembling that of what we now call the recorder. The reason for the different sizes is to create the different octaves that today's clarinet can reach. The second piece of music is Les Luth's Consort and is an arrangement featuring the lute, a typical stringed instrument of the time. In the first image, we see two men in the wilderness amidst a hunting excursion. The etching represents the masculine society of the time. Same-sex friendships were dependent on virtue and selflessness, not on personal gain and control. Later we will see how same-sex friendships among men differed from those same friendships between men and women. This type of relationship is seen in The Merchant of Venice between Bassanio and Antonio. We see Bassanio favor his friend over his wife Portia in the courtroom scene. The favoritism between men demonstrates the gender hierarchy in society. Men controlled the power, and women were forced to serve as an afterthought. Critics claim that it is Portia, rather than Antonio, who interferes and adds tension to one another's relationship with Bassanio. This is an interesting etching that displays the manner of the male-dominated culture. The two men are shown in the middle of a conversation. Both men have their chests towards the viewer, which depicts their importance. The woman is on the back of the horse with her back to the viewer. We see her unable to interact with the two males she is in between. Also, she is forced to travel wherever the man with the reins chooses to go. The woman does not have a say in the relationship, which was typical of marriages of the period. This conflict of gender was one typical of the period, as young men had to reconcile between male bonds fostered by Renaissance patriarchy and the necessity of marriage to acquire full status within that patriarchy. Many stereotypes of women did exist in the period. One of the deviant stereotypes was that of a scold. Women who spoke out against society or against men were deemed as scolds. Their actions were worthy of punishment by fines or public berating. Here we see a woman wearing a scold's bridle, being paraded around in public by a man in order to make an example of her and women who attempt to challenge social norms. The scold's bridle attached over the woman's head and had an oral insert to prevent the woman from talking. The cage simile was popular for describing how women were confined to their homes and kept like birds in cages. Marriage was also seen as a prison to contain the illicit behaviors to which women were prone. We see the theme of containment in many aspects of women's lives. Here we see the image of a wedding. Marriage was considered the answer to control the dark temptations of women. Women were expected to marry as a step in the life of a woman of the time. In courtly marriages, the woman was not given much of a say, but instead was forced by the man or the two families involved. Though marriage did not provide the woman much additional freedom, it did protect her from incurring different stereotypes of deviance, such as whore or witch. The wife was considered to be the archetype of good women in post-Reformation Protestant England. The changing views of women in marriage came with the shifts in religion. Though women were seen as a companion to their husbands, they were always viewed as subordinate. Here we see a piece of art called The Art of Painting. It demonstrates the ability of painters of the time. The depiction of light and the realistic presentation are features it is most renowned for. The other part to note in the painting is the role of the man and the woman. The man, the painter, is the actor who is doing the action. The viewer is intrigued by what he is doing, and he is the center of the painting, as you can see by the title. The woman, on the other hand, is idle, as the subject being painted. An extreme case of women serving as the subjects of men is in brothels. Some women, such as Mistress Overdone in Measure for Measure, operated the brothel as a way to make a living. Though she was discriminated against by society, she knew no other way of life. The women who worked in the brothel did hold some power, however, because they provided a service that the men wanted. In the image, you see the two men giving their full attention to the prostitutes. Women were thought to be the weaker sex, and therefore more prone to give in to their sexual appetites. Some women of the time did hold legitimate power. One example was Bess of Hardwick. She inherited her wealth from her fourth husband and employed Robert Smithson to build her house, as you see here. We can draw parallels between Bess of Hardwick and Portia from The Merchant of Venice. Both women inherit their wealth from men in their lives. The estate is located in Derbyshire. She was the second wealthiest woman in England behind the Queen. The structure is representative of the changing times of the period. No longer were estates built to provide a defense from intruders, as you can see from the exterior walls made primarily of windows. The dance of the early modern period is a significant feature of the period because it was a popular social event of all classes. The interesting part to note about this dance is that the male and female dance steps are the exact same. As you have seen, gender roles changed throughout the early modern period in England. Though women were regarded as the weaker sex, they did find ways to persevere and gain social power. Never before have I been so drawn to learning about women and the gender roles of a society. These changes of gender roles were what struck me as most interesting while learning about the plays of William Shakespeare.